Welcome to part 2 of the total solar eclipse tutorial. In part 1 we created the red solar prominences, now we'll create the corona. Start with a new file from the file menu. Save the file to avoid losing any work. Delete the default cube and the lamp. Switch to Cycles Render Engine. In Preferences, Interface panel, switch Auto Perspective on. In the World panel, the world already has a material, so click Use Nodes. Click the color and enter hex value 222D38 for a dark blue sky. We're going to use circle mesh objects to represent the Sun and the Moon. We don't need spheres. Press numpad 1 for front view and add a circle mesh object. Then in Tool Shelf set vertices to 512, fill type to a triangle fan, align to view on, Y location -1. In Outliner, rename the object Sun Disk. In Materials panel, click the New button. Name the material Sun. Change the shader type from the Surface pop-up menu to Emission. Change color to white. Click the Strength field, type 1, then press and hold 0 to fill the rest of the field and press Enter, obtaining the maximum value. Next, the corona. Still in front view, add a grid mesh object. In Tool Shelf, set subdivision to 27 by 4, align to view on, Z location 2.5. Press Ctrl 2 for a level 2 subdivision modifier. Tab to Edit mode. Press A to select all, then U for the UV mapping menu, choose Unwrap. Now Alt-click the bottom row of vertices to select them. Set pivot point to 3D cursor. Press Shift-Alt-S and enter 1 to make the vertices spherical. Press G followed by Z, enter -0.73 to move them down. Change pivot point to median. Press S to scale, enter 0.59. Alt-click the next line of vertices to select them. Press period on the keyboard for 3D cursor pivot point, then press Shift-Alt-S, enter 1 to make the vertices spherical. Press G followed by Z, enter -0.92 to move them down. Press Ctrl, for median pivot point, then press S to scale, enter 0.8. Alt-click the next line of vertices to select them. Press period for 3D cursor pivot point. Press Shift-Alt-S, enter 1 to make vertices spherical. Press G followed by Z, enter -0.9 to move them down. Press Ctrl, for median pivot point, then S to scale, enter 1.8. Finally, Alt-click the top line of vertices to select them. Press period for 3D cursor pivot point, then Shift-Alt-S, enter 1 to make them spherical. Press Ctrl, for median pivot point, then S to scale, enter 5. Then once again S to scale, followed by Z, enter 2. Last thing, move them up with G followed by Z, enter 0.45. Tab to Object Mode. In Materials panel, click the New button. Name the material Corona Polar. Change the shader from the Surface pop-up menu to Mix Shader. Click the right end of the Factor field for the pop-up menu and select the last item, Color Ramp. Set the first shader from the pop-up menu to Transparent. Set the second shader from the pop-up menu to Emission. Now press Shift F3 for the node editor window. We're going to work on the nodes for a stripy material that fades into the distance. Enlarge the view with Ctrl up arrow. Then arrange the nodes nicely. Add a Mix RGB node from the Color submenu and drop it on the line between the color ramp and the Mix shader, so the new node is connected between them. Change to Multiply mode from the pop-up menu and set factor to 1. Duplicate the node with Shift-D and drop the duplicate on the line between the original and the Mix shader, making the connections. We need this structure to create a layered opacity map that will soften edges and fade out the coronal streams. Select the color ramp and duplicate it with Shift-D. Connect the color output of the duplicate to color 2 of the second multiply node. Move the black and white color points on the ramp closer together on the left, positions 0.18 and 0.37 respectively. This will be used to soften edges of the coronal objects. Now add a gradient texture and connect its factor output to the factor input of the duplicate color ramp. Set gradient type to quadratic sphere from the pop-up menu. Add a mapping node from the vector submenu and connect it to the gradient texture. In mapping, set X and Y location to -0.5 and Y scale to 0.5. Add a texture coordinate node from the input submenu and connect the UV output to the mapping node. In the original color ramp, move the white point to the left 0.787, then add 2 color points, moving them right to bring most of the brighter values closer to white for a more gradual fade to black. Change interpolation to cardinal from the pop-up menu. Add a noise texture and connect its factor output to the color 2 input of the first multiply node above, and also connect it to color input of the emission shader. Set noise scale to 10, detail to 2, and distortion to 1.5. Feel free to experiment later, different values can be used. Add a gradient texture and connect its factor output to the factor input of the original color ramp. Set gradient type to quadratic from the pop-up menu. Add a mapping node and connect it to this gradient texture. Duplicate the mapping node with Shift-D and connect the duplicate to the noise texture. In the middle mapping node, set X location to 1 and Z rotation to 90. In the bottom mapping node, set Y scale to 0.03. Connect the UV output of the texture coordinate node to the new mapping nodes. One final correction, set color as the connecting output of the original ramp rather than alpha. That's the material done. Press Ctrl down arrow to reduce the view. In Outliner, rename the object Corona Polar. In Modifiers panel, set Render Subdivisions in the Subsurf modifier to 4. Return to 3D view. Still in front view, press period for 3D cursor pivot point. Press Shift-D to duplicate the object, then R to rotate, enter 180. Duplicate with Shift-D again, press R to rotate, enter 90. We now have 2 polar corona objects and one of the equatorial ones. Rename this one Corona Equator. Tab to Edit mode. Select the leftmost line of vertices if they're not selected already, and press G followed by X, enter -3.8. Press Ctrl comma for median pivot point, then S to scale, enter 0.8. Alt-click the next line of vertices to the right to select them, then press S to scale, enter 0.98. Alt-click to select the next line, press S to scale, enter 1.6, then G followed by X, enter 0.25 to move them to the right. Press Z for wireframe view. Alt-click to select the rightmost line of vertices, then press G followed by X, enter 0.24. Now tap to Object Mode. For a more authentic look, we should slightly alter the equatorial material. In Materials panel, click the plus button next to the Name Edit field to create a numbered copy. Rename the material Corona Equator. In Node Editor, change Noise Scale to 6, Distortion to 3, and Emission Strength to 2. In the top color ramp, move the black marker to 0.2. In 3D view, press period for 3D cursor pivot point, then Shift D to duplicate the object, followed by R to rotate, enter 180. Select the 4 corona objects, then press G followed by Y, enter 1 to make room for new objects on the Y-axis. We're now going to create some smaller equatorial corona parts that will look more like coronal plumes. We'll create 2 types, a long narrow type for individual streams and a short rounded type for those characteristic petal shapes in the corona. Still in front view, add a grid mesh object and in Tool Shelf set subdivision to 4x4, align to view on, X location -1.5 and Y rotation -90. In Outliner, name the object Corona Stream. Press Ctrl 2 to add a level 2 subdivision modifier. In Modifiers panel, set Render Subdivisions to 4. Tap to Edit mode and with all vertices selected, press U for the UV mapping menu and choose Unwrap. Tap to Object Mode. In Materials panel, assign the Corona Polar material. Press the plus button next to the name input field to create a copy and rename it Corona Flame. In Node Editor, change Noise Scale to 2, Detail to 4, Distortion to 4.5. Change Noise Mapping Y Scale to 0.5. In the top color ramp, move the black and white points more to the right. Change gradient type in top gradient texture to spherical. Set emission strength to 8. In the second color ramp, move the white marker to the right and rearrange the other 2. Add a third and move it right. Back to 3D view. Tap to Edit mode and set pivot point to median. Now I'm going to create a shape along the x-axis that is wider at the source and narrows down into the distance. When done, tap to Object Mode and set pivot point to 3D cursor. Press Shift D to duplicate, then R to rotate, enter 180. Shift D for duplicate again, tap to Edit Mode, press Ctrl, for median pivot point. Shape the object into the shorter type, like a petal, along the x-axis. Then tap to Object Mode again, press period for 3D cursor pivot point, and press Shift D to duplicate, followed by R to rotate, enter 180 to rotate the duplicate to the other side. Make the objects easier to see by adjusting viewport color in the material. Now the flame objects can be individually positioned, duplicated, and adjusted for added variation. I'm creating about 12 of these flame objects of different lengths and shapes for a nice varied look. I also adjust their position between 0 and 1 on the y-axis so they don't overlap. Make sure the objects work well together, the flow in the corona looking natural. Check the image in the rendered view. I'm going to play with the noise settings of the corona flame material for an improvement. That looks better. Detail at 5.1, distortion 2.4. Back to regular view. Now for a circular coronal glow object. Still in front view and with 3D cursor in the center, add a circle mesh object. In Tool Shelf, set vertices to 64, radius to 8, fill type to triangle fan and align to view on. Set Y location to 2, placing the circle behind the corona objects. In Outliner, rename it Sun Glow. In Materials panel, click the New button and name the material Sun Glow. Change the shader type from the Surface pop-up menu to Mix Shader. Set first shader to Transparent and the second to Emission, and set its strength to 0.05. Click the right ends of the factor field and select the last item, Color Ramp. Rearrange the windows again, enlarging the timeline view, and change it to the node editor. In the color ramp, move the black marker slightly to the right and the white marker a little more to the left, 0.83. Click the color well for the white color, set it to hex value F2, F9, FF. Then add another color point and move it a little closer to the white point. Set interpolation to cardinal from the pop-up menu. Connect the color output of the ramp to factor of mix shader and to color input of the emission shader. Add a gradient texture and connect its factor output to the color ramp. Set the gradient to quadratic sphere from the pop-up menu. Add a mapping node and connect it to the gradient texture. Set X and Y scale to 0.3. Add a texture coordinate node and connect the object output to the mapping node. Preview the result with rendered mode in 3D view. We need to correct the polar corona. In Outliner, select one of the corona polar objects and play with the noise settings. Your results might vary, but my improved settings are Scale 10.7, Detail 2, Distortion 0.4. That's the corona done, completing this second part of the tutorial. Let's rearrange the windows again so we're ready for part 3, where we assemble all the elements and animate the eclipse.